Hi all, in this short video I thought I'd talk to you about network protocols and how they are used in computer systems and the networks that uh, sort of encapsulate um, the idea of, there being protocols related to a network. So in essence what we're dealing with here is this idea of how a computer connected to a network will be standardized in its own way. Now, that can be a bit confusing in the sense of, well, how can that work? And we'll talk about that in a bit. In this, you're going to sort of understand and look at the ideas of what a network protocol might be, and this will explain those protocols that are within the application layer. And this includes HTTP, HTTPS, FTP, DNS, SMTP, POP, and IMAP. So, the two that I want you to sort of be aware of straight off the bat is sort of DNS and HTTPS. And I know you may have heard of HTTP, but not so much DHCP. And that's because they all have different meanings. Now, they are in order, so you've got dynamic host configuration protocol for DHCP, DNS is domain name system, 3 is hypertext transfer protocol, and hypertext transfer protocol secure. And they all have different roles too, and you can see that here. They all have different roles based on what they do on the application layer. Now, ultimately, these are common tasks. But what are those common tasks? What do these sort of protocols allow us to do? So if you want to stop the video and just have a moment to think about that, write down some ideas, and hopefully you would have paused it, and now you can see sort of options there. So visiting web pages are quite classic, streaming media from Netflix or Spotify, transferring files over FTP, and sending emails. Okay, all of these centrally rely on a computer, and undeniably, they each have one or more protocols that are associated with it. Ultimately, if you think about sending an email, whether or not you're on a Mac or a Windows PC, what you'll notice is that they are somewhat similar in their own way, and there are some protocols that we need to sort of talk about in order to see and encapsulate this idea of how would we send an email. The first one is DNS, domain name system, and this is where the domain name system shares the task of keeping track of all the mappings of the IP addresses to domain names. So, in essence, google.co.uk maps to an IP address of 192.168.0.1. So, what we're saying here is that this domain name, google.co.uk, is mapped to an IP address of whatever Google's IP may be. So, for example, in fact, this is what we just talked about. Let's say you've got a domain like BBC website, bbc.co.uk, to look up information, but computers beneath the surface need to know the IP address. They need to know that in order to find out the information. And that's only helped in excess by using HTTP and HTTPS, because we actually have to access those web pages that are sitting on Google or BBC servers that are hidden behind an IP. And this is a protocol that is used for remote servers across the World Wide Web and is usually left to access web pages. Okay, and these days behind many apps too. What you'll spot is that what you've essentially got is a web browser, that is what we could call a user agent, if you will, and that requests a resource from a web server. The server responds to requests and downloads any CSS or cascading style sheets, any JavaScript or images that are needed to make the full web page. The secure version of that encapsulates everything we just looked at, but encrypts the data stream so that only the web browser and the web server can actually see the contents of the data that's being downloaded, essentially. You've got FTP as well, which is there for transferring and sharing files across the internet. You don't need to necessarily need access to web pages, but you can upload web pages to a server of some kind, and in some way also upload files via a web page to be stored on the server. That's quite typical too. Unlike HTTPS though, but much like HTTP, FTP is unencrypted, which means that the data that's transmitted between our client and server can be intercepted, and it could be really insecure. And you can imagine the kind of problems that would incur. So if you've got an important file of Excel sheets and that's got all your data on, well, you might need to protect that. SMTP, or Simple Mail Transfer Protocol, is used when we want to send an email. Okay, when you want to send an email, you might like to remember it. If I grab the pen, oh, there it is. You might want to remember, because in SMTP, the S here stands for simple, or you can think of it as send. Okay. Now, essentially what happens is it listens for the request from an email client. If the client's authorized, it will send the email from the server down to the client, and the recipient will get it. POP, on the other hand, is a bit of the opposite way. In essence, the protocol retrieves the emails to something like Office 365 or Outlook from an email server. And the latest version of that is called POP3. With POP, those emails are downloaded from the server to the client. Although these days you're more likely to see IMAP, which is where they are sent from an email server to a email client application. And those are usually typically used in combination with each other. That means that if you check the emails on your phone and your laptop, you'll see the email in both clients, and if you delete the email in both, or in one of them, it will delete in both too. So all of these network protocols that we've talked about in this short video, they all exist on what we call the application layer. Okay, and you could look more at that later. There you go. There's a short video on network protocols. I hope you found that useful.